The Tree of Life by C.L. Moore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Greg Marguerite. The Tree of Life by C.L. Moore. Over time-ruined Ilar, the searching planes swooped and circled. Northwest Smith, peering up at them with a steel-pale stare from the shelter of a half-collapsed temple, thought of vultures wheeling above carrion. All day long now they had been raking these ruins for him. Presently he knew thirst would begin to parch his throat and hunger to gnaw at him. There was neither food nor water in these ancient Martian ruins, and he knew that it could only be a matter of time before the urgencies of his own body would drive him out to signal those wheeling patrol ships and trade his hard-won liberty for food and drink. He crouched lower under the shadow of the temple arch and cursed the accuracy of the patrol gunner whose flame blast had caught his dodging ship just at the edge of Ilar's ruins. Presently it occurred to him that in most Martian temples of the ancient days an ornamental well had stood in the outer court for the benefit of wayfarers. Of course, all water in it would be a million years dry now, but for lack of anything better to do, he rose from his seat at the edge of the collapsed central dome and made his cautious way by still intact corridors toward the front of the temple. He paused in a tangle of wreckage at the courtyard's edge and looked out across the sun-drenched expanse of pavement toward that ornate well that once had served travelers who passed by here in days when Mars was a green planet. It was an unusually elaborate well, and amazingly well preserved. Its rim had been inlaid with a mosaic pattern whose symbolism must have once borne deep meaning, and above it, in a great fan of time-defying bronze, an elaborate grillwork portrayed the inevitable Tree of Life pattern which so often appears in the symbolism of the three worlds. Smith looked at it a bit incredulously from his shelter. It was so miraculously preserved amidst all this chaos of broken stone, casting a delicate tracery of shadow on the sunny pavement as perfectly as it must have done a million years ago, when dusty travelers paused here to drink. He could picture them filing in at noontime through the great gates that... The vision vanished abruptly as his questioning eyes made the circle of the ruined walls. There had been no gate. He could not find a trace of it anywhere around the outer wall of the court. The only entrance here, as nearly as he could tell from the foundations that remained, had been the door in whose ruins he now stood. Queer. This must have been a private court, then, its great grill-crowned well reserved for the use of the priests. Or wait, had there not been a priest-king, Ilar, after whom the city was named? A wizard king, so legend said, who ruled temple as well as palace with an iron hand. This elaborately patterned well of material royal enough to withstand the weight of ages might well have been sacrosanct for the use of that long-dead monarch. It might... Across the sun-bright pavement swept the shadow of a plane. Smith dodged back into deeper hiding while the ship circled low over the courtyard. And it was then, as he crouched against a crumbled wall and waited motionless for the danger to pass, that he became aware for the first time of a sound that startled him so he could scarcely credit his ears. A recurrent sound, choked and sorrowful, the sound of a woman sobbing. The incongruity of it made him forgetful for a moment of the peril hovering overhead in the sun-hot outdoors. The dimness of the temple ruins became a living and vital place for that moment, throbbing with the sound of tears. He looked about, half in incredulity, wondering if hunger and thirst were playing tricks on him already, or if these broken halls might be haunted by a million-years-old sorrow that wept along the corridors to drive its hearers mad. There were tales of such haunters in some of Mars's older ruins. The hair prickled faintly at the back of his neck as he laid a hand on the butt of his force gun and commenced a cautious prowl toward the source of the muffled noise. Presently he caught a flash of white, luminous in the gloom of these ruined walls, and went forward with soundless steps, eyes narrowed in the effort to make out what manner of creature this might be that wept alone in time-forgotten ruins. It was a woman, or it had the dim outlines of a woman huddled against an angle of fallen walls and veiled in a fabulous shower of long dark hair. But there was something uncannily odd about her. He could not focus his pale stare upon her outlines. She was scarcely more than a luminous blot of whiteness in the gloom, shimmering with a look of unreality which the sound of her sobs denied. Before he could make up his mind just what to do, something must have warned the weeping girl that she was no longer alone, for the sound of her tears checked suddenly, and she lifted her head, turning to him a face no more distinguishable than her body's outlines. He made no effort to resolve the blurred features into visibility, for out of that luminous mask burned two eyes that caught his with an almost perceptible impact, and gripped them in a stare from which he could not have turned if he would. They were the most amazing eyes he had ever met, colored like moonstone, milky, translucent, so that they looked almost blind, and that magnetic stare held him motionless. In the instant that she gripped him with that fixed moonstone look, he felt oddly as if a tangible bond were taut between them. Then she spoke, and he wondered if his mind after all had begun to give way in the haunted loneliness of dead Illar. For though the words she spoke fell upon his ears in a gibberish of meaningless sounds, yet in his brain a message formed with a clarity that far transcended the halting communication of words, and her milky-colored eyes bored into his face with a fierce intensity. "I'm lost! I'm lost!" wailed the voice in his brain. A rush of sudden tears brimmed the compelling eyes, veiling their brilliance, and he was free again with that clouding of the moonstone surfaces. Her voice wailed, but the words were meaningless, and no knowledge formed in his brain to match them. Stiffly he stepped back a pace and looked down at her, a feeling of helpless incredulity rising within him, for he still could not focus directly upon the shining whiteness of her, and nothing save those moonstone eyes were clear to him. The girl sprang to her feet and rose on tiptoe, gripping his shoulders with urgent hands. Again the blind intensity of her eyes took hold of his with a force almost as tangible as the clutch of her hands. Again that stream of intelligence poured into his brain, strongly, pleadingly. "Please, please take me back. I'm so frightened. I can't find my way. Oh, please." He blinked down at her, his dazed mind gradually realizing the basic facts of what was happening. Obviously her milky, unseeing eyes held a magnetic power that carried her thoughts to him without the need of a common speech. And they were the eyes of a powerful mind, the outlets from which a stream of fierce energy poured into his brain. Yet the words they conveyed were the words of a terrified and helpless girl. A strong sense of wariness was rising in him as he considered the incongruity of speech and power, both of which were beating upon him more urgently with every breath. The mind of a forceful and strong-willed woman carrying the sobs of a frightened girl. There was no sincerity in it. "Please, please!" cried her impatience in his brain. "Help me! Guide me back!" "Back where?" he heard his own voice asking. "The tree!" wailed that queer speech in his brain, while gibberish was all his ears heard, and the moonstone stare transfixed him strongly. "The tree of life! Oh, take me back to the shadow of the tree!" A vision of the grill-ornamented well leaped into his memory. It was the only tree symbol he could think of just then. But what possible connection could there be between the well and the lost girl, if she was lost? Another wail in that unknown tongue, another anguished shake of his shoulders, brought a sudden resolution into his groping mind. There could be no harm in leading her back to the well, to whose grill she must surely be referring. And strong curiosity was growing in his mind. Much more than met the eye was concealed in this queer incident. And a wild guess had flashed through his mind that perhaps she might have come from some subterranean world into which the well descended. It would explain her luminous pallor, if not her blurriness, and, too, her eyes.